What if I told you the man who may have killed Custer lived to tell the tale? On a warm June afternoon in 1876, a young Lakota warrior named White Bull heard screams echoing across the Little Bighorn River. Within minutes, he was riding straight into one of the most legendary battles in American history. What followed was a brutal clash of survival, courage, and destiny, where White Bull would count coup, fight hand-to-hand, and perhaps even fire the shot that killed Custer himself. This is his story, told through his own eyes, a rare glimpse into the chaos, bloodshed, and honor of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. It was a calm afternoon, and the horses grazed quietly when White Bull first caught the sound of terrified cries. Turning from the herd he was watching, he looked toward the enormous camp spread along the banks of the Little Bighorn. Panic had erupted. People were running, shouting. From the distance came the faint reports of rifles. The village was under assault. White Bull leapt upon his swiftest horse and sped back as fast as the animal could carry him. He did not yet realize that he was riding straight into one of the most storied clashes in American history. The encampment stretched nearly 3 miles along the river's western bank. As White Bull rode, he weaved between frightened women and children fleeing the danger. Everywhere, men scrambled to seize weapons, mount their horses, and meet the threat. Each tribal group occupied its own portion of the settlement. He rushed past the Arapaho and Cheyenne at the far northern end before reaching the various Sioux sections. His own family lived with his wife's sons, Lakota, near the middle. He paused only long enough to see that they were safe before pushing southward where the danger was greatest. The Hunkpapa Sioux, directly in the path of the attackers, were camped there. At their side would be Sitting Bull, the revered leader of the resistance against American intrusion. White Bull urged his mount faster. He was not just another Lakota warrior. His father, Makes Room, was a chief of the Minneconjou, and his mother, Goodfeather, was Sitting Bull's beloved sister. White Bull bore a particular responsibility to protect his uncle. By the time he arrived, hundreds of fighters were already battling the soldiers. As he expected, they were American troops, 3 companies under Major Marcus Reno. Their gunfire had ripped through lodges, already killing many. He recognized some of the fallen. Old Three Bears, a respected figure of the Minneconjou, lay dead. Sitting Bull's prized horse was also slain, though Sitting Bull himself was unharmed. When his uncle noticed him, he called out, urging him to act. White Bull spurred his horse forward. The American firing line had halted a short distance from the edge of camp. Some warriors dismounted to return fire, while White Bull and others stayed on horseback. Raising his rifle, he began shooting back. The battle was deafening. Rifle cracks, war cries, and smoke thick in the air. Accuracy was nearly impossible. Some Americans knelt to fire, while others rode. Among them, White Bull saw Arikara and Crow scouts, enemies of the Sioux allied with the soldiers. Unlike other warriors, he didn't know them by face. The struggle was savage. Men he had grown up with fell before his eyes. Dog with Horns, one of the boldest of the Minneconjou despite his youth, was struck down within feet of the American line. The sight fueled White Bull's fury. Spotting the enemy's flag, he shouted to his comrades that whoever was truly brave should seize it. But the force of their resistance was already breaking the American momentum. The soldiers began to falter. They retrieved their flag and pulled back, retreating toward cover among the trees. The Sioux shouted in triumph as they gave chase. What had begun as a battle now resembled a buffalo pursuit. The warriors rode down the retreating soldiers, striking them with arrows and bullets as they fled through the woods toward the river. As the troops struggled to cross, they became easy targets for those firing from the riverbanks. Many were shot into the water or dragged from their horses and beaten to death. Blood stained the river red. By the time the soldiers were driven across, White Bull had not claimed a life. But even as the first attack collapsed, shouts rang out behind him. Another, larger assault was coming from the north. White Bull understood too late that the southern fight had been a diversion. Their families now faced the true threat. Turning his horse, he raced northward with hundreds of others. He kept close to the river to watch the soldiers riding over the northeastern hills. There were hundreds. Custer had 5 companies with him, though White Bull only made out 4. Their aim was clear, to cross into the northern village and seize the women and children. By the time he reached them, the soldiers were already attempting to ford the river. Both sides exchanged fire across the water. In the midst of this, White Bull spotted a buckskin-clad officer at the front, fearlessly leading his men. Despite being an obvious target, he showed no hesitation. Many native accounts later described the same figure, often believed to have been Custer himself. White Bull joined the fight from downstream at first. He fired from a position across the river at C Company, commanded by Custer's brother-in-law, Lieutenant James Calhoun. The Americans fired back, and with no cover along the bank, White Bull was forced to pull back. He circled eastward, climbing the far hills to flank them. Dozens of warriors followed. Below, the soldiers abandoned their crossing attempt, retreating up the slope while firing in withdrawal. Momentum was shifting. On his ride, White Bull encountered another Sioux group maneuvering to cut off Calhoun's men. They were led by Crazy Horse, his close ally and one of the greatest Sioux warriors alive. Only a week earlier, they had fought side by side against the Americans at the Rosebud, never expecting to meet them again so soon. Now, with the enemy falling back, victory felt certain, greater even than Rosebud. White Bull's thoughts turned less to survival and more to honor. He cried out, urging his men to charge. Crazy Horse did likewise. As they rode, White Bull shouted to his friend, reminding him that life was short. The soldiers kept falling back toward stronger ground on the hills. White Bull and Crazy Horse rode in wide circles around them, firing recklessly, ignoring the storm of bullets in return. The terrifying display of mounted warriors circling broke the soldiers' morale. Some soldiers fled, others dropped their weapons and begged for mercy. None was granted. White Bull spotted one rider isolated. He spurred his horse toward the man, but held his fire. Among the Sioux, the highest honor was not killing, but counting coup, touching an enemy in battle without slaying him. It was a demonstration of courage, proof of skill. A shot from another warrior toppled the soldier from his horse just before White Bull closed in. The man lived, though terrified, as White Bull leapt from his mount and struck him across the chest with his horsewhip. "I have overcome this one," he shouted. Nearby, warriors cheered. The act counted only if witnessed. White Bull seized the soldier's revolver and ammunition as trophies before remounting. Rejoining Crazy Horse, he pursued survivors up the hillside. Together, they singled out a straggler. The soldier spun in his saddle to shoot, but White Bull reached him first, yanking him from his horse. The man screamed, firing wildly into the air before Crazy Horse dispatched him. Though Crazy Horse delivered the fatal blow, White Bull held the greater glory for counting coup first. He soon added more. He ran down a lone soldier with his horse. Another wounded trooper, bleeding yet defiant, stood with revolver and carbine in hand, fending off dozens. White Bull circled, closed from behind, and knocked him down with his horse, adding another coup. By then, the retreating troops had gathered atop the hills. Loose cavalry horses stampeded wildly, distracting warriors eager to capture them. White Bull himself seized one as a prize. But at that moment, a bullet struck his horse in the head, sending it crashing down. He lost both mount and rifle in the chaos. Now on foot, with only his revolver and whip, he searched for a soldier to disarm. He and one locked eyes. The soldier fired and missed. White Bull charged, but the soldier hurled his rifle at him and lunged. Suddenly, White Bull was thrown down. The man pinned him, striking furiously. As he reached for the nearby rifle, White Bull struggled, grappling desperately. Though White Bull was strong, his opponent fought like a man possessed. He seized White Bull's long hair and tried to bite off his nose. For a moment, White Bull believed he was finished. Calling for help, he shouted over the din. 2 Lakota, Bear Lice and Crowboy, heard and rushed in. Their clubs struck both American and White Bull beneath him, but the blows freed him. White Bull snatched his revolver and smashed it into the soldier's head before finishing him. He later admitted, the man fought bravely and deserved respect. Taking the soldier's rifle and ammunition, he rejoined the fray. By now, the battle neared its end. Crazy Horse had overrun Calhoun Hill. Only the position later called Last Stand Hill remained. The soldiers there fought fiercely, cutting down dozens of Sioux and Cheyenne, using the fallen as barricades. Barely 30 remained, hopelessly outnumbered 50-1. White Bull later reflected that the army was foolish to send so few against so many. They could never have prevailed, though they fought with determination to the end. He would never call them cowards. Yet the native warriors inevitably closed in, many wielding rifles taken from earlier casualties. Soldiers now fell to the very weapons once carried by their own comrades. The firepower against them only increased while their numbers dwindled. A few desperate men attempted to break free, but were swiftly cut down. White Bull rushed in and counted 2 more coups. His kinsman Red Horse always wondered why no reinforcements came. The Sioux expected Reno's men to return and strike them from behind. Red Horse later said that had the troops not divided, they might have inflicted great losses. Custer himself had begged Captain Benteen for support, but it never came. Custer and his men would perish alone. White Bull pushed up the hill, but his ankle suddenly gave way, sending sharp pain through his leg. He collapsed. There was no visible wound, perhaps a glancing hit, or an earlier injury now revealed as his adrenaline faded. Either way, he could no longer walk. Yet little movement was needed. By his count, only 10 soldiers remained trapped atop the hill. They would not escape. Crawling to a ditch, he found a clear shot at them. From there, he watched them fall one after another. They were tired, but they fought to the end, he later said. Though his enemies, he respected their bravery. Among the last men, he thought he saw the same buckskin officer from the river. The officer, revolver in hand, made his stand. Spotting White Bull, the officer fired twice and missed. White Bull returned one shot that struck him down. Many would claim Custer's death, but White Bull later became convinced he had been the one. Within an hour, the fight was finished. The final soldiers fell, and Custer's last stand ended. It was a glorious battle, White Bull recalled. I enjoyed it. He gathered eagle feathers as trophies, while most warriors moved south to continue against Reno. Unable to ride, White Bull waited for a friend to bring him a horse. His family rejoiced to see him alive. Even Sitting Bull came, wrapping his ankle in buffalo wool while listening proudly to his nephew's tale. White Bull had counted 7 coups, slain 2 men in hand-to-hand combat, and survived his horse being shot beneath him. It was a remarkable feat. Still, Sitting Bull cautioned him against pride. "Nephew," he warned, "one of these times you might be killed." Once mended, White Bull returned to survey the battlefield. Most warriors had left, leaving the dead scattered silently across the grass. Their eyes stared skyward. Hours later, mutilations would be carried out, but at first he saw none. Later, families of the slain likely took scalps in vengeance. White Bull himself scavenged clothing, washing 2 pairs of trousers as gifts for his father. While searching, he found his relative Bad Soup also walking among the bodies. Reaching the crest of Last Stand Hill, Bad Soup pointed out one corpse. Though his distinctive long hair had been cut short, his face was unmistakable. Long hair, Custer. Stripped of clothing, but left otherwise untouched, he lay where he had fallen. He thought he was the greatest man in the world, Bad Soup remarked. Now he lies there. That evening, White Bull joined the attack on Reno Hill, but with the Americans entrenched, the fight offered little chance for glory. He stayed through the night into the morning, then returned to rest. The following day, his father woke him with urgent news. Scouts had seen activity to the north. White Bull mounted, gathered warriors, and rode out. After 10 miles, they spotted an American scout, proof of a larger force nearby. Indeed, this was part of the column under Generals Terry and Gibbon, moving to rendezvous with Custer. Dust clouds revealed their approach. They would not reach the village until the next day, but they represented a far greater danger than Custer's attack had been. White Bull returned at sundown, but word had already spread. Families packed their lodges and began moving west. The great victory Sitting Bull had promised was theirs, but now it was time to withdraw before the army struck back. White Bull departed with them, carrying with him one of the most dramatic stories of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Thank you for watching today's episode on Empire History Central. Please like, share, and subscribe to help grow our rising community.